Why did I read this?
No, God! No, God, please, no! 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 No!
What's going on there, all you true believers and newcomers alike? I'm Superfly Comics Guy, and I'll be taking you through the perplexing Spider-Man Clone Saga Omnibus Volume 2 today. We'll be taking a look at the cover, the spine, the contents collected, the build quality, and a flip-through where I discuss some of my thoughts, opinions, and recommendations, and boy do I have some opinions on this book. But yeah, if you like this video, you know how to show it, and if you're a nerd like me, feel free to participate in the discussion down below. But with that out of the way, it's time to dive into this book, so make sure to leave your brains and any existential crises at the door for safekeeping, and let's do this. Okay, so here we are looking at the dust jacket of the Spider-Man Clone Saga Omnibus Volume 2, one of the rarest omnibuses out there right now, long out of print, very difficult to find. I believe this is the only cover available when this book came out. And I actually really like it. It's a recoloring of one of the issue covers that's included in this book, but I don't know, I really like what they did here, even more than the original cover. The red and blue backgrounds, red and blue are my favorite covers. I don't know, it pops. But let's take a look at the spine. Also a really big fan of that spine design. That Spider-Man font to me is so nostalgic. And the back. You got your Marvel cover gallery, showing you all of the issues collected inside this book. Speaking of which, those are Amazing Spider-Man 402 through 406 with the Super Special, Spider-Man 1990 from 59 to 63 with the Super Special, Spectacular Spider-Man 225 to 229 with the Super Special, Web of Spider-Man 126 through 129 with, again, the Super Special, the Venom Super Special, New Warriors 61 through 66, Spider-Man The Jackal Files, Spider-Man Maximum Clonage Alpha and Omega, Spider-Man Unlimited number 10, Spider-Man Team Up number 1, Spider-Man The Lost Years 1 through 3, and Spider-Man The Parker Years. Holy crossovers, Batman. And this book has a cover price of $125 US, $158 Canadian. But let's see what we have under this dust jacket. There we go, exact same cover as we saw on the dust jacket. Exact same spine as well. And a different image on the back. We got this drawing by Mark Bagley. Pretty cool. But let's start talking about the less cool parts of this book. The inside. Okay guys, here we go. I hope you've prepared a drink or something because we're taking a look at the Clone Saga Omnibus Volume 2. I'm gonna keep spoilers to a minimum. I know it's going to seem like I'm talking about a lot of things here, but that's just because there are so many random stories in here. But trust me, I'm gonna avoid spoilers. Just keep in mind I'm flipping through the book, so you might see something that kind of contains a spoiler. But if anything pops up, I will mention it and give you a timestamp or something to skip to. But anyway, if you watched my Volume 1 review, you'll know that I thought that book started off pretty okay. There was lots of interesting character moments in there, especially around Ben Reilly's story. It started to take a dive towards the ridiculous, towards the latter half of Clone Saga Omnibus Volume 1, but overall, I was kind of optimistic that, you know, maybe the Clone Saga wasn't as bad as I thought it was based on everything I'd heard before. This book completely shattered my optimism. This was so bad. Probably some of the worst Spidey stories I've read so far. But, you know, that's what happens when you're a Spider-Man collector, collecting the character's history from the origin to the modern day. That means taking the good with the bad. And unfortunately, we're stuck with the bad for a bit here. Man, this really felt like homework to try to read through. But anyway, this continues right from where Volume 1 left off. So I guess minor spoilers for Volume 1, but it's not really a huge deal. Ben Reilly is in jail because Peter is framed for murder, and, you know, because they're clones, one of them had to go. So Peter's got to clear his name, and you get some pretty heavy involvement actually from the assassin Kane, who showed up in Volume 1, and we finally get to learn more about him, which was kind of cool, who he is, where he comes from, that kind of thing. You get some stories in here involving Judas Traveler, who's like this supernatural being who's seemingly obsessed with Spider-Man and knowing what makes him tick. He wants to know, is Spidey a force for good, or is he the cause for all of the evil forces in the city? And he basically just creates a whole bunch of social experiments for Spider-Man to deal with and then observes what happens. And after that, he just kind of vanishes and doesn't show up. Okay, sure. There's an issue in here with like a new Green Goblin that appears, even though Green Goblin's supposed to be dead by now, but I guess we have a new Green Goblin who just kind of shows up, and it's like, is he a good guy? We don't know, but then he just vanishes as well for a while. Okay. But it's not all bad in here. One of the interesting plot points in here is that by this point, Mary Jane is with child. And that raises important questions for Peter about what's really important to him in his life. Where does this fit in his responsibilities as Spider-Man? How is he going to juggle all this? I will say, though, that Mary Jane, at the beginning of this book anyway, was pretty annoying. Everything I liked about Mary Jane in the Michelini and McFarlane book, which I also reviewed, is pretty much the opposite here. She kind of just hangs back and worries and nags Peter about all the stuff he's doing as Spider-Man. So that was kind of annoying to read after all the development she got in the past. But I will say she does get better writing towards the second half of this book. But anyway, the primary conflict that's going on in this book, we get some more BS about which one is the clone, Peter or Ben. And that finally gets sort of resolved early on in this book. So minor spoiler warning here. It's not really a big spoiler, but if you don't want to know, I'll leave a timestamp here that you can skip to. But after running some tests, we find out who the real Peter Parker is, and we find out that Peter is the clone, and Ben is the real one, and this really messes with Peter, and it's, I don't know, kind of an excuse for Ben and Peter to fight again, and you get some interesting artwork here. By this point, Peter completely loses it. He acts really out of character and makes some really increasingly questionable decisions, and honestly, he feels like a completely different character after this point. Whereas Ben starts to act more like the traditional Spider-Man we know and love. He's hopeful, he's responsible, he's cracking jokes, and look, as a reader, you really have to convince yourself that Ben is the real Spidey, because hey, as far as the writers were concerned back then, he was. Otherwise, I'm telling you, you're going to be really frustrated with how Peter is written and treated in this book. I know it was a struggle for me, even with that mentality, so keep that in mind. But anyway, after that, the book kind of rewinds the clock, and we get this story called Planet of the Symbiotes for a bit, which was okay. The story's kind of interesting, albeit completely far-fetched. Basically, the premise is that the Venom symbiote separates from Eddie Brock and sends out like a distress screech, which is picked up by some planet of symbiotes who then decide that they should try to come to Earth and take over Earth and consume it. It's out there, but I mean, it was kind of a fun story. You get a team up between Peter and Ben and Venom, so that was kind of cool. Unfortunately, there was a lot of bad art in this story after the first issue. The first issue was pretty cool, but then the art quickly devolved, but we can talk about that a bit later. Then you get this section called the Jackal Files, which are really just a bunch of character bios for everybody in the story. So that tells you how confusing this gets, because they felt the need to just throw in a bunch of character bios in the middle of the story to be like, hey, this is everybody you're reading about, don't forget. And this all kind of culminates in this new character, another clone of Spider-Man, named Spider-Side. You get it? Because he's designed to kill Spider-Man, so he's committing genocide, but for Spider-Man... Yeah, you get it. Let's not talk about this anymore. And then we get a Spider-Man Maximum Clonage Alpha and Omega, which is... This is straight up toilet worthy. It's this giant crossover with Spider-Man and the New Warriors and some other people, and this whole plot by the Jackal to like release a deadly virus or whatever, and then everybody's got to work together to stop it. And yeah, some stuff happens, and God, it was not good. There's Spider-Side again, the most memorable Spider-Man villain ever. Oh God. Moving on. And then the next section you get is an arc called Growing Pains, which was kind of a weird lizard story. It involves the lizard. And wow, this one was really not memorable. I don't know. It involves... Oh God, look what they've done to the lizard. What is that design? What happened? And this... Okay, so there's this character called Armstrong who gets powers randomly throughout this story. And what does he decide to call himself after he gets superpowers? Strong Arm. Yeah, Armstrong gets powers and calls himself Strong Arm. That's the level of stuff we're dealing with. God, who comes up with this stuff? Sorry about that. Had to excuse myself for completely unrelated reasons, obviously. But then we get some super special backup stories. I'm not calling them super special. That's what they're named. Just super specials. Which are kind of quick little short stories, and these are pretty cool. Stan Lee actually writes this one, and they're fine. They're quick reads, and they serve honestly as a nice break from the nonsense. You get a bunch of short stories in here, and it's just taking you back to various times in Peter's life, or it's telling a side story. These are all right. And I say it's a break from the nonsense because after that we're straight back into more nonsense. There's this bit involving Spider-Man getting mind controlled, and it's just another excuse for him to fight Ben Reilly and terrorize his wife, as any good Spider-Man is inclined to do. But anyway, then you get a bunch of issues where Ben joins the New Warriors and just hangs out with them for a bit. So you just get a whole bunch of New Warriors issues. These were okay at best, but I didn't really feel like they needed to be included in here. They almost had nothing to do with Spider-Man at all, or the overarching story. It's just a bunch of New Warriors stories where Ben Reilly occasionally appears in them. And it really, it's probably fine on their own, but in terms of the pacing of this whole book, it really grinded to a halt during this New Warriors segment. And then towards the end, you get some bits called Spider-Man The Lost Years, and those are just basically prequel stories from when Ben was living on his own before he came back to the city. So even before Volume 1. So those are fine, I guess. In terms of the art in this book, man, I was really disappointed. I think it's worse than Volume 1. Volume 1 was up and down. It had its good moments and its bad moments. This was pretty inconsistent, or maybe just consistently disappointing is the best way to put it. There's no Mark Bagley in here, and you really feel his absence. It occurred to me how much his artwork really carried the first volume, whereas in here you just have a whole bunch of silly errors, like coloring errors here, like where Ben Reilly's hoodie is just the complete wrong color. Or you have moments like this where you just see some of the most 90s body proportions you will ever encounter. And then whatever the hell these panels are supposed to be, I don't even have words for them, but, enjoy looking at them, I guess. Yeah, the art was really disappointing in this book, but fortunately, it's kind of that the bad art is mostly in the first half. It does get a little better in the second half. A little better, but not by much. But anyway, here we are in the extras now, taking a quick look. We got some variants, some pinups, some trade paperback covers, that kind of thing, from the time. Whole bunch of covers and drawings. Dear Lord, what is going on here? Yeah, it's questionable, some of the art in here, which we just talked about. We got a blurb from J.M. DeMatteis from Spider-Man The Lost Years trade paperback. Some trading cards. That's kind of interesting. Here we go. Some in-progress pages. Those are always cool to see. And that's it. Not too many extras in this book. As for build quality, in this book you're getting 1,288 pages. There is the eye for you, nice and big. And this is probably the best part about this book, the build quality. It's fantastic. Nice thick pages, big eye, minimal gutter loss. The only thing I'll knock it for is that you don't get page numbers or a table of contents, but I wouldn't want to be the guy working on table of contents either for this book, so fair enough. But anyway, time to wrap up here. After reading Volume 1 of the Clone Saga, I wasn't entirely grasping why the Clone Saga was such a disliked story. I mean, don't get me wrong, Volume 1 wasn't great, but it had its moments, especially with Ben Reilly. But after reading this book, man, I totally understand now. This was very difficult to get through, even as a Spider-Man mega fan. This felt like homework to read through, and I'm saying that after reading it in a complete, continuous package like this omnibus. Can you imagine how annoying it must have been for readers back then in the 90s, who would wait like a month to get the next issue of the story to come out, only for there to be nothing substantial in there? Man, it's no wonder you hear about so many readers from the 90s just quitting the series because of this event. So I'm struggling to think of anybody I could recommend this book to unless you're already a fan of the Clone Saga. This is terrible for new readers. It's terrible for fans of, traditional fans of Spider-Man. So I can't recommend this book at all, especially not at the crazy prices it's currently going for. Please, if you're like me and you collected this book for its historical significance, then just wait for a reprint. Please do not pay the outrageous prices that people are asking for this book. You're just going to be disappointed after reading it. But anyway, thank you so much for tuning into this review. I hope I'll catch you again in the next video. You have yourself a great day. I've been Superfly Comics Guy, and until next time, keep reading. See ya, guys.